Your mind regulates your body based on what it feels and thinks that you want. And the body can be largely misguided in its assumptions of what you want. Let's explore this and understand what this really means. When you constantly keep on thinking about something that you really don't want, you are using your imaginative power. You're using your creative energy to design worry and things that you do not like and you do not want in your life. So the imagination comes into play. Now this imagination, it starts to communicate with your perception, as in what you want, how you see things, your narratives towards the things, what you actually want out of life. If you're constantly focused on what you do not want, you are loading in your perception the data and the information that this is something that I clearly don't want. But this does not really generate momentum towards a target. This simply clarifies what is not needed. And when you do not have a clear direction and all what you have is information of what you really don't want, what really happens is the feelings and the emotions of the mind and the body, they start collaborating together to keep in the forefront of your awareness what is not required in your life. Well, that's how you feel. Well, that's what you choose. So what do you think has to be done? You have to realize that emotions are spread throughout the body in a matter of seconds if you're not careful. Okay, the mind and the body, they synchronize based on your dominant emotions. If you're highly sad, you will sense it both in your body and your brain. You will sense it in your heart, and your body can become highly acidic within minutes with the right amount of intensity of sadness and stress combined. So what do you think is the answer to protecting yourself? The first thing you have to keep in mind is that the brain has many operations it has to carry out. One of the jobs of the brain is regulatory function. So if you present an image and you keep it in front of your mind and you supply to this image a lot of emotional intensity, the job of the brain is to help you generate more ease in the context of what you want. So if destruction and self-sabotage is something you're constantly renewing, the brain is going to optimize itself to ensure that you stay in pain and psychological chaos. Because, well, if you habitualize that this is something that is a matter that you have to replay again and again, the brain will say, you know what, fine, okay. And then the resistance of the brain will be broken. And in fact, a lot of tension can be stored in the body, and your body can become very resistant to happiness and optimism because, well, you're always replaying such negative imagery, such bad feelings in your body and your mind. What do you think happens when people keep on doing that? They become highly desensitized to optimism and happiness, and they become highly sensitized to stress and negative input. So what should be done? The first thing that has to be clarified here is that you need to know where you have to go, and you also need to know what you do not have to do. So it's important that you know what should not be done, of course, but that's half of the equation. You also have to have radical clarity of the path you want to take, the goals you have, the deadlines you have set for yourself, and the objectives within the frame of those goals you have set for yourself so that you can actually accomplish that goal. When I say that you should not have negative input, you should not have it in the context of interpreting the negative in a negative way. In simple words, you must objectively know what's going on, even if it's negative, so you can deal with it. But to deal with the negative input in a negative format, that's where the problem shows up. For example, if you think that your house is on fire, now this is negative news, but if your house is on fire and you know it's on fire, you can actually take the right steps to call help in order to protect your house, right? So you can convert something negative in your mind in a sense where action orientation with the right understanding comes into play. But when you only have negative input, when you only have things that are bothering you in the stream of your consciousness constantly replayed over and over again, it creates havoc in the body and the brain. It literally starts to destroy you from the inside. Because if you have destructive imagination that communicates with your perception, in which you're making decisions based on the imagination you're replaying, well, the parts of that imagination that are negative that become very sticky, you constantly keep on replaying them, and then they start communicating with the imagination. Imagination communicates with perception, and perception, it influences you based on your decision making, based on your choices and preferences, because perception has a lot to do with the narratives you build. the do's and the don'ts, the likes and the dislikes. So many people are highly ignorant of the fact that they have misguided their brains and their bodies, and their misguidance has plagued their ability to generate pleasure and displeasure. Now, you're going to find that some of the people, they're highly displeased when it comes to doing the right things, and they're highly pleased when it comes to doing the wrong things. So they're inverted in the way they have to function in their disposition. They have corrupted their disposition. Now, the reason why this happens to many of the people is not because they do it alone. Shaitan is very active in making you a person that is more compatible against the Sharia. So he destroys you from the inside, and he knows a few key operations that fall in minority that govern the operations of the majority. In simple words, he knows where to attack you in your value system, in your emotions, in your feelings, and he understands you, because this thing is a very advanced form of psychology. This thing is a very advanced psychologist. It has been studying you, it observes you, it notices you, it knows what you want, it knows the path you take to your work, it knows the environmental structure in which you fall into sin. It knows what bothers you, it knows what makes you sad, and it constantly monitors you in order to destroy you from the inside. So it's your job to protect yourself. How do you protect yourself? By remembering Allah, by imagining what you want, as in using your imagination for design and not using your imagination for destruction. And in the context of perception, you need to have the right narratives towards the world. Your worldview will influence your choices. Your choices will influence the trajectory in which you decide to generate momentum. In simple words, what you decide is actually one thing, behind which is the whole operational structure governed inside your perception. So if you're not fixing your perception, you cannot fix yourself. It's important to understand that. So in order for us to really realize how to be on the right course, we have to understand that one of the most important of all things you can ever do in your entire lifetime is to train yourself to think constructively, to train yourself to sit down just for 15 minutes and genuinely think about your life, genuinely think about the choices you're about to make, genuinely think about how you got where you are, genuinely think about what you actually do, and not just be hindered away by pleasure. Thinking is real hard work for a lot of people because they're just running in the direction of pleasure. I'm going to tell you something. You're not created primarily for pleasure. You're primarily created for purpose. Pleasure is one small part of the equation of life. And if you maximize it and you abuse it and you become an extremist in your pursuit of pleasure, it's important to understand that after a limit, pleasure becomes a cage. Pleasure becomes a prison. Pleasure becomes your handcuffs, and then it creates psychological problems and it starts to interfere with healthy decision making. So you have a job to constantly cleanse your imagination and your perception and to maintain your mind. You maintain your body, you maintain your house, you maintain your car, you maintain your clothes. What about your heart? What about your mind? What about deeply thinking about the things you have to do and if you're doing them in the right way? All of this requires that you take a good amount of time to sit down and genuinely focus on what is happening with you, around you, and within you. This is very important to understand. Now, if you are constantly looking at the external picture and there's constant internal chaos and failure to manage your stress, failure to regulate your emotions, plagued imagination, plagued perception, eventually this leads to a lot of mental illnesses. It leads to psychological disorders, it leads to bodily diseases, it leads to serious formats of anxiety, and it leads to a lot of pain related to business and relationship. Okay, so you do not want to make any of these mistakes. Your job is to regulate your mind, think about your decision making, and the criteria you use to make those decisions. This is important. What is the criteria you're using to make decisions? Have you clarified the values you have for yourself, or you're just following pleasure of some kind and hoping that, you know what, I'll just keep on having fun and one day things will make sense. One day everything will be all right. Listen to this carefully. A lot of people are highly misguided in this illusion that one day everything will be fine. There will be no hellfire if you never had to do anything in the context of course adjustment, and if you were never to make a mistake and if everything will be all right, there will be only paradise. No, things are not always going to be all right for many people. It's important to understand that. For some people, things will never be all right for eternity. They will enter hellfire. Okay, so when you start telling yourself that things will be okay, do not use it as a means to generate laziness and to become a serial procrastinator. When you say things will be all right, it should be done in a calculated format. You're doing your work, you're thinking about your life, you're making dua, you're praying on time, you're trusting Allah, repenting sincerely, and seeking knowledge, and having the right food and sleeping on time, and carefully observing your failures to make adjustments and to have the right course of action as the standard for your life. All of these things are very important, okay? And you should be very mindful of various misguiding narratives that in the forefront look like they're just cute and nice and optimistic. If you do not maintain your mind will be maintained by shaitan. This is something that is a reality for many of the people. You have to be highly mindful of this. He can totally destroy your brain's filter system, and he attacks something called the reticular activating system, your ability to filter information and focus properly. So make sure that you are highly conscious of what's happening within you. Do not avoid it, do not ignore it, and be comfortable seeking help if you have to. Okay? In fact, seeking help is a means to develop. Seeking help is from the foundations of healthy growth. It's important to understand that. When you understand how your mind functions, you will understand the changes you have to make, and you will be more equipped with knowledge and clarity, which will serve as a combination, which will serve as a means for you to strengthen your character, which will serve as a means for you to realize the traps you have to avoid and the direction in which you have to constantly stay focused. Think about this. Be highly mindful of how you visualize information, how you imagine, and if you're mismanaging your imagination or not. Use your imagination to design what you want. It's important to be cautious of what you do not want. In fact, it's one of the most important parts. You need to know what you do not want. Otherwise, you might start to deviate slowly in a direction that is just really wrong for you. So to know what you do not want is an important singular part of the equation. However, the focus needs to be in the direction of what you want. You must be able to concentrate properly and ask yourself important questions and stay committed to the right course of action.